Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this important seminar on the role of local government in creating places of innovation. My name's Greg Clark. I'm the chair of the Connected Places Catapult, and I'm really delighted to welcome all of you here today. I'm shortly going to be introducing to you the Mayor of Liverpool, and she's going to give the keynote opening address, and we're very grateful to Mayor Joanne Anderson, who's joined us today, despite the fact that she's got COVID. We're really grateful and very honoured to have her here. Now, Connected Places Catapult is the UK's innovation accelerator for cities, for transport, and for place leadership. We focus on providing innovation as a service, and we do that through incubators, accelerators, demonstration projects, and through ecosystem development, particularly in relation to new industries and new technology platforms. We're a platform organization, and we focus on producing scalable enterprise solutions to public policy challenges. Now, you won't be surprised to hear that Connected Places is an important idea when we come to think about innovation hubs and innovation locations. Those innovation locations are very important to the UK. They provide increased productivity, they promote trade, they foster enterprise, they optimize digitization, they accelerate decarbonisation and a just transition. And of course, they foster shared prosperity across our country, all of which are so important as we seek to plot our recovery from the COVID virus and pandemic. Most importantly, innovation hubs have to be connected places. They're connected by transport and infrastructure, they're connected by digital platforms, by ecosystems, by value chains, and most importantly, they're connected by people and by networks of people and organizations that work together. Now, when we think about innovation hubs, the UK has multiple advantages. It's got an extraordinary industrial heritage, a great, of course, history of discovery and R&D. It's got very sound enterprise models, and it's got a uniquely innovative financial services system. But so far, only about 10 places within the UK have really got to any kind of scale in innovation. If you compare that with the Northeast Corridor of the USA, roughly a 50 million person region stretching from Boston to Washington, you could say that over the past 20 to 30 years, more than 20 places in that part of the world have become established, scaled up innovation hubs. So we have a kind of stretch agenda in this area, and this is of course being embraced by the UK government. And we're anticipating a major policy statement from the government this week, perhaps even today, to tell us about the government's new innovation strategy. Now, today's event is the first of two open events that the Connected Places Catapult is hosting and promoting, and we're working very closely with the UK Innovation Districts Group, and you'll hear from their chair, Emma Frost, later in the morning. The agenda today is looking specifically at the role of local government in innovation hubs. We'll look at the role of local government as a convener, as a curator, and also as a customer for innovation. So let's get started. It's a great honour for me to be able to introduce to you the Mayor of Liverpool, Mayor Joanne Anderson. She will give the keynote address. That will be followed by a presentation from Dr. Tim Moonen from the Business of Cities Limited, who've done two very important pieces of work recently with Connected Places Catapult, and we'll be launching those reports here today. And then I'll be introducing you to a fabulous panel that includes innovation place leaders from Leeds, from Belfast, and from London, as well as hearing again from Dr. Tim Moonen. With no further ado, let me welcome you all to the seminar and hand over the microphone to Mayor Joanne Anderson of Liverpool. Mayor Joanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you everyone for coming today. Pity I can't meet you in person, but I look forward to that at some point in the future. I've only been there for a couple of months, just 3 months, but obviously with this accent, you can tell I've grown up in Liverpool all my life and been surrounded by innovation. Some of the things we're really proud of historically, we had the first School of Tropical Medicine in the country. And today, the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine has a £500 million research portfolio, employing 700 staff and identifying, doing new research, creating new innovations in medicine that the world can access. We have great innovations around material sciences, with our universities of Liverpool working with private sector like Unilever company in terms of developing packaging around personal care. We have a high performance computing sector. Sorry, COVID, I'm really struggling with getting my words out. High performance computing sector, that's just down the road in Holton, that has just received 216 million from IBM to to develop our excellence in that area within the region. During the pandemic, we've been, as part of Liverpool City Council and its relationship with our anchor institutions and our universities, we worked together to support some of the testing that needed doing during the pandemic. So the army coming in and testing people sort of early on and during the first pandemic, and then further on being involved in events and doing testing and research, again, to support the whole country, the globe, in fact, in trying to understand COVID. That's led on to a pandemic institute, again, a new innovation in ensuring that future pandemics, we might be slightly best prepared, but bringing that innovation to Liverpool, working in partnership with other organisations, not just in Liverpool, but across the globe. And when we look at our knowledge quarter, which is an area where we have our universities, our School of Tropical Medicine, our hospitals, our knowledge quarter is based in our cultural quarter. So you can leave our universities, you leave that space and you can go and listen to a concert at the Philharmonic Hall. You can access the Everyman Theatre. The place where our innovation and knowledge quarter is just as important to us as what we do there. Looking at one of the buildings within our knowledge quarter, we have something called Paddington Village, and there we have one of the healthiest buildings in the world. Going into the building, when people describe that to me, I couldn't quite get my head around it, but actually going into the building, the air is purer, there's less toxins coming off the furniture. The space is cleaner, there's a green wall in reception, there's a panoramic view across the city, so when you look away from your computer at your desk, all those things that we're supposed to do when we look away from our computer are in place. This building actually makes you cleverer, and it attracts people and will attract people for our health and life science innovations from across the country, probably across the world. But my particular concern and my background is, do the people right next door access those opportunities? So whilst we have this fantastic knowledge courses that such innovative work going on there in such a beautiful place, matched with our cultural place, we can also have some of the highest levels of child poverty in the next district. So one of the things I'm kind of really proud to be involved in just before I become Mayor of Liverpool was an innovation that was supported by the Liverpool City region, and that was something called Kindred. And what Kindred did was cluster together. It started off with 250 social enterprises, but has quickly grown to 500 social enterprises. Clustering together, they have Kindred is a social investment pot, but it belongs to those social enterprises, and they decide how to borrow from it, how to put money back into it, how to support each other. So I've just had to recently put on hold, but I was doing a business scale up at John Moores University, and my focus was scaling up social impact. How do we as businesses scale up social impact? And Kindred is a fantastic example of how that's done, by clustering together as organisations and by being counted as one. they have the ability to scale up, access those opportunities, access research and development, access resources on a grander scale that allows the sector to scale up in an innovative way, that also what is being measured by those businesses, rather than just thinking of scale up from a purely business point of view, but how do we scale up social impact as well. So there's just some of the examples of what's going on in Liverpool. Obviously, the ecosystem is really important, and I've talked with our new heads of regeneration, had many discussions about that, and there's work that's being done in the Liverpool City region to create an ecosystem that supports innovation, growth, scale up, as well as social impact. And I suppose that's where our focus is. As a civic leader, there's always things we should do to support the business ecosystem, and also, the ecosystem for growth. But we want to do that in a way that ensures access of opportunities for absolutely everybody, and that's by creating pathways, I think, ensuring that people from all sections of the community are able to access some of the wonderful innovations around people and place. I'm going to end it there, Greg. I know that you want me to sit on the panel and do some questions after this, but I can take any questions now if you need to.
Mayor Joanne, thank you so much. You've really raised very important issues for the whole conversation today, not least, of course, focusing on Liverpool's wonderful heritage, both in health and medicine innovation, and this building that you described that is, one of the world's healthiest buildings and actually makes you cleverer, I think is a brilliant innovation. And of course, you've drawn a very strong line under one of the key issues we must discuss today, which is how to make innovation inclusive, how to make innovation socially meaningful, and how to make innovation something that has a real impact on everybody's lives, so that everybody's benefiting from the innovation that we take forward. I didn't invite people to put questions in now, and it's up to you, Mayor Joanne. If you feel happy and willing to stay and participate in the panel, that's brilliant. We would love you to do that, but we don't want to extend your energy too much as you're feeling unwell. So if you're happy to stay with us, let's have you on the panel and have some Q&A then. Is that okay with you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much once again, the Mayor of Liverpool, Mayor Joanne Anderson. Thank you. Let's go then now to our second speaker, who is Dr. Tim Moonan, co-founder and managing director of the Business of Cities Limited. The Business of Cities Limited is a global research and intelligence hub led by Dr. Tim Moonan that focuses on innovation, city development, and many other things around the world. And Tim and his team have been working with the Connected Places Catapult to produce 2 new reports on places of innovation. Tim, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Greg. It's great to be here, great to take part in this session. I know everyone in this conversation will be eager to enter the Q&A soon, and what I really would like to do is just survey and just explain over the next 5 or 10 minutes where this work really came from, what is it really all about, what do I think it really adds to the conversation about the future of hubs of innovation in the UK, and offer a few reflections specifically on the topic today of local governments, local authorities, in what way they contribute, they foster and, as we say, curate these kinds of places to really excel and accelerate. So I'll run through a few slides to start with, and really this has all been motivated by the question that many of us share, which is about how it is that nations and regions and then of course cities and local governments, how it is that they can deliver more hubs of innovation collectively, but also on a case-by-case basis, how they can make the best and the most of their place and the innovation potential that they possess. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that the 2 pieces of work, the 2 papers that we've been working on with the Catapult over the last 12 months, really try to build on the collective wisdom of districts and locations and other geographies around the world over the last 20 or 30 years, but then also very specifically have consulted leading practitioners within the UK which has been extremely exciting and rewarding from our point of view to really understand where we are at collectively in the long journey of the UK's 200, 300-year story of innovation right now. Where can we say we are? How far along the journey are many of the leading cities and locations that we can identify, and what's needed next? And a big thank you to those, not least on the panel actually, but also many others around the country with whom we really benefited from some excellent, honest and really insightful conversations about what's needed and how we can bring this together and work together collectively, which I know we'll talk about later on. So if we go to the next slide, what really we've tried to observe, particularly in the playbook paper, that's the second in the series, really the 50-year story that we've observed of different kinds of locations within the UK, some within our major cities, some at the edges of our major cities, others elsewhere in smaller locations and rural areas, and what different kinds of places have been to the fore in different cycles, both of urbanization and of the economy. And then what we're really noticing is the kinds of effects, the kind of impacts that those places that have achieved that kind of scale, that kind of maturity, those kinds of business outcomes, what kind of ways those have really directly contributed, as Mayor Joanne Anderson said, to the jobs and to the innovation quotient of the city, but also created the spillover effects on the civic participation, the social inclusion, the ability to deliver the right kind of land use in the right sorts of places, the confidence that cities and local governments need to really adjust to the new economy, and I guess adjust as we are now facing this post-crisis period about how exactly the economy and where exactly the economy will gravitate in the months and years to come. So as we go to the next slide, what we really began to do, and in the first paper in particular observed, is that innovation of course takes many different shapes and sizes around and in our cities. You have, of course, the famous innovation districts. You have, of course, the individual hub buildings and blocks that are very much centers of gravity for a particular region. But then you also have triangles and corridors that are connecting places that are quite dispersed, and therefore, in many cases for local governments, you have the question of how it is that you manage to bring forward a location that may go over and spill over multiple local government boundaries. How do you work together? How do you build that shared picture and that shared sense of how it will benefit all those who participate in it? It also begs the question, when you think about the different formats, what kinds of ambition, what kind of investment, what kind of governance do you really need to make these locations succeed and excel in their own right? And what we brought to bear in this work is quite a lot of the global insight, a lot of really great case studies, and many of the, what I would call the sort of the systematic recipe that we can observe, we can distill, knowing of course that really the journey that locations go through is very much an art more than it is a science, and you have to really adapt and customize the insights to the specific circumstances you find yourself in. If we go to the next slide, if we may, what we have really tried to encapsulate, I think, across both of these papers is a number of core insights that practitioners, leaders, experts, academics, many others at the coalface of innovation around the world have really observed to us, which is firstly that, as Greg rightly observed at the start, the UK does have plenty of room, plenty of scope to catch up, not only to the northeast of the USA, but also to Central Europe and the Northwest European coastal corridor from Paris all the way to Copenhagen. And if we even think about the emerging innovation clusters in the Greater Bay Area of southern China, there's a lot of global competition, and we need to think globally when we're thinking in this way. We also have observed, and many have reminded us, that you cannot deliver innovation by edict, by labeling, by design. You have to curate, as we say. You have to observe and spot what is happening organically, what is taking place in the market, and support and create the enabling framework for that activity to scale and to flourish. That seems, in most cases, to have been more successful than a highly prescriptive, highly planned, highly designated type of approach. But a balance of interventions and a proactive approach from local government certainly appears to be very important and beneficial in a large number of cases. we can also see and observe that not all places within a given region or nation will be major hubs of innovation. And therefore, we have to think about what are the growth drivers that are really shaping the outlook for particular kinds of places, and what ways that national policy as well as local intervention can really provide that shaping over the long term. These things do not arise, as we observe, over 5 or 10 years, but 30, 50, 100 years in many cases. Long-term policy commitments combined with growing innovation, maturity and confidence locally tends to be what we see in the major locations around the world and in the leaders within the UK. And finally, I would also observe that innovation districts and other locations do not, they're not simply like all other locations. They have specific, unique requirements because they are at the leading edge of change, and therefore they have particular kind of curation skills that need to be paid attention to, but also a recognition that they have to evolve and need to evolve and should evolve, and therefore changing and altering the place requirements, the leadership requirements, the connectivity, as Greg mentioned, I think is healthy and required for many places to succeed. Innovation is not a one-off process, and the leadership locally to support it has to reflect that. So that's what a lot of the global evidence really tells us. And as we go to the next slide, what we have observed is that evolution around the world tends to occur in stages, and that there are distinct cycles to how specific hubs emerge, evolve, set up, and then really grow in scale and eventually achieve the kind of critical mass that delivers return for the whole community, the wider geography within and beyond the specific boundaries of the location. And when you have that, you also begin to draw in a wider stakeholder community who have to be engaged and coordinated and very much part of the leadership approach. And therefore, understanding local government's role in that, I think, becomes a critical consideration for those who are leaders and are department heads and other office leaders within local government. If we go to the next slide, I just want to observe, perhaps we might say there are 3 core themes before I hand on, that I think where we observe local authorities play a critical enabling and convening role. The first, as we go to the next slide, is the place and connectivity requirements, if you like, the physical asset. How do local governments plan for growth and not only identify opportunities for development, but actually really spot where those locations are demand-led, where there's an opportunity to cluster in and crowd in the right kind of complementary activity. How do you really confront the big gaps that are there in terms of transport, in terms of placemaking and livability that may inhibit the long-term growth of that location? How do you create the idea about what is the follow-on once you begin to create that critical mass? Where are the next stage of companies going to grow to? What housing is available for them? Amenities, how do the different locations that are beginning to emerge across a region, how do they work together? These things have to be considered carefully. It's been done, I think, extremely well in an example like Kitchener in the west, to the west of Toronto in Canada, a small city, 200,000 people. It's gradually evolved from having a university-led ecosystem to a city centre one, light rail and other mobility and transport-oriented development around its key stations have really been a big enabler of major tech activities to cluster in to that location, despite the small size and the distance from a major hub. A very important example, I think. Secondly, on the next slide, we observe the ecosystem and community building roles that local governments have. This is about, as Greg says, understanding how procurement can be used as a catalyst for innovation. It's about how using the head lease role of a city government, or providing specific kind of municipal space, or investing in a key building that wouldn't be able to get off the ground otherwise. Auckland is a great example of this, the flagship location of Wynyard Quarter. So all of the ways in which you can build both the innovation appetite, but also the citizen communication, and avoiding the idea that you either have innovation or you have inclusion, but actually you see the ways in which one can reinforce the other. And then finally, the leadership, the fundamental role on the next slide that leadership role plays in succeeding and enabling a location to succeed. And I guess in particular, local governments recognizing their role in the system, and Oslo very much as a city recognizing that it cannot command and control its innovation development. It has to support others, major institutions, leading enterprises to grow and succeed. So this is very much about what cities can do to enable, to convene others, to recognize that they are part of a distributed system when it comes to innovation districts. So on my final slide, I really just want to herald a question about what's ahead from our point of view. I think, as we rightly observe, plenty of scope for the UK to make more of its emerging places, to get more places getting off the ground where the conditions really demand it. I think we can see a journey here where more UK cities, the innovation narrative can begin to flow through to the brand and the identity of those cities more clearly and coherently, as innovation space potentially becomes a more important role in the city land use and infrastructure. I also think, finally, that there's a lot of opportunity ahead for local authorities, but also place leaders, experienced practitioners to come together, as we're doing today, and as I think the Innovation Districts Group has pioneered, to really come together, learn and do the right things together, recognize common mistakes to avoid, really help others to know what they can do to support this, recognize how you deliver economic value as well as social value together, how do you use a place as a catalyst and a test bed, and how do you bring in the hard infrastructure and those key physical assets that we know are so important, connected places, but also understand that connectivity is a human characteristic as well. It's a network characteristic. It requires soft capability too. So there's so much exciting material in here. We urge you to read and enjoy these two papers. There's much more info. I'm looking forward to the Q&A ahead, and back to you, Greg.
Great. Well, Tim, thank you very much indeed. There's a lot in what you've just said that's very helpful for us. And what I took from the conversation is that you're offering some key insights really about what local government can do to foster innovation hubs, but there are also a couple of warning remarks in what you've said about what doesn't work. It doesn't work simply to designate, or I think you said to create an innovation hub by edict, never really works. You also talked, I think, in a very important way about the UK's opportunity. If you like, the UK has untapped innovation potential. And then you've gone through in a very helpful way these three key roles of local government: place and connectivity, ecosystem and community, leadership and coordination. All very clear, Tim, and thank you very much for the work that you've done. Now, the two reports that Tim referred to, of course, are available on the Connected Places Catapult website, and we encourage people to download them, enjoy them, and circulate them and make them available to others. The whole idea here is to create shared intelligence for everyone. Now, we're going to begin our panel discussion, and in a moment, I'll introduce the panelists. Let me just say two things about this. Firstly, a panel discussion is always better if our distinguished guests send us lots of questions and points. So using the Q&A function on Zoom, please feel free to send us questions for individual panelists or for the panel as a whole. And don't forget that Mayor Joanne Anderson from the City of Liverpool is also joining the panel, and we're really honoured that she stayed to participate in that. So our panelists will be Mayor Joanne Anderson, Dr. Tim Moonen, who you've just met, and then Emma Frost, who's Director of Innovation, Sustainability and Community at the Queen Elizabeth Park. And Emma is also the chair of the UK Innovation Districts Group, which is a very key partner for Connected Places Catapult in bringing forward this work. And as you heard from Dr. Tim Moonen, a key partner in producing the two reports that he's just presented to you. Emma will be joined by Jane Brady. Jane is the Digital Innovation Commissioner at Belfast City Council and playing an increasing role for the whole of Northern Ireland in thinking about its innovation hubs and locations and how to really develop the innovation ecosystem in Northern Ireland. And they'll be joined by Rochelle Schuster, who's the head of programme innovation at Leeds City Council, one of the local authorities, of course, in England that has been really focused on innovation for several decades now and has been able to produce some very substantial progress. So I'd like you to welcome the panel. We'll have all the cameras back on. If we may, we'll ask the panelists to turn their cameras on. We'll get straight into the conversation. So we look forward to the questions that you're going to ask us. Mayor Joanne, welcome back. Tim, welcome back. And Rochelle, Emma and Jane, welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. Let me start with Emma and Jane and Rochelle, if I may. And I want to really kick off with the obvious question. In a sense, this is an opportunity for you to react to what Mayor Joanne and what Dr. Tim Moonan said, but what do you see as the specific challenges that you have to address when you're establishing an innovation hub? And how are they different to the challenges or opportunities you face when you're trying to grow an innovation hub that you've already got? Emma, I'd like to invite you to begin.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for the opportunity to be on the panel as well. So I'll speak from the experience that I have via the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in East London, where we're actually at the very early stages of kind of re-establishing the park as an innovation hub. And in essence, the first challenge there is formalizing an innovation strategy and partnership without strangling it, because we've actually been doing a lot of the innovation practice very organically over the last 10 years. And there's a lot of value in that, in building the partnerships, the relationships, the trust, the depth of interaction with the place. So being able to support that more and formalize it more without strangling it is one of these challenges that we're in as we cultivate more of the innovation offer at the Olympic Park at the moment. And for us, the sort of second challenge stroke opportunity is really one of almost a rebrand, so we're trying to build on the very powerful kind of messaging and brand that we've had around being the Olympic legacy destination from 2012, but trying to understand how we cultivate that in a different way and move it towards being recognized as a hotspot for urban innovation and what else we can apply to the place to really generate returns on that. Another challenge I'd highlight is uniting the partners to work as one. Sounds really simple, but how do we go beyond co-location and how do we really build genuine collaboration and potentially foster what I refer to as a kind of collective leadership of place? Very, very difficult to achieve, but so important to have kind of woven through the fabric of your innovation cluster. And for some partners, that actually means learning to let go a bit, which I know sounds quite challenging, but it is about taking that genuine, humble, kind of generous approach to leadership and understanding when you might need to relinquish a little bit of control. And for us at the Olympic Park, the London Legacy Development Corporation is in precisely that position. So for the last 10 years, we've led the kind of the challenge and the shaping of the regeneration around the Olympic Park. And now actually it's about cultivating more of that collective leadership and understanding the sort of the trust and the rapport that we need to be able to lean on and work really effectively with others across the public, private, academic and community sectors. I think it's also about understanding what a shared responsibility of place and its people really means. What does that look like across the sort of sectors that I outlined? How do you structure it? How do you invest in it and sustain it? And what are the returns from this, and how are they felt and by who? So they sound like quite deep questions, but they're really essential ones to begin with, because it is about how do we extract and return more value from this innovation activity. Just as Mayor Joanna said at the very opening, and as Tim reinforced with his points, we need to not only understand the stretch agenda that you outlined, Greg, we also need to understand the depth agenda. So how can these places that have real innovation potential, how can they go deeper and feel connected by real roots to their place? How can they respond to the local context and the local need? And how do they ensure that inclusive innovation practice is their guiding mentality and that they return more shared value to place? Because growth without the right direction or growth at any cost is not the sort of growth that we need to see going forward. I would highlight the final kind of challenge that we're experiencing at the moment is deciding when the when partners need to work individually and when they need to work as a collective. And again, sounds quite simple, but really trying to understand what's in and what's out in terms of the innovation collective activity and articulating the value return of that really convincingly is quite a difficult nut to crack. So getting as clear as possible from the beginning stages. I think I'll hand over for others to contribute before coming back on different challenges of growing it, because I've spoken for a while.
Emma, thank you very much. There's an awful lot in what you've just said, not least this point about how you generate real social value from innovation that Mayor Joanne raised at the beginning. Jane, let's come to you, if we may, for your reflections on this first question. It's really about the challenges of starting an innovation hub and then the challenges of growing one when you've already got it. How do you see this?
Thanks, Greg. And I guess I would echo a lot of Emma's points and Tim's. And obviously, we work really closely with the Innovation District Group, which has been so helpful and supportive with us in formulating our strategy within the Belfast context. But as Tim outlined, in starting or even growing an innovation district, it's a number of key aspects need to be there in that petri dish to create that ecosystem. So I guess one of that is that core competency, and that can be that academic competency or indeed industrial background. Another significant necessary piece is access to finance, be that private or public sector finance, and of course the skilled workforce, and also then that local leadership and infrastructure as well. So if I reflected back to where Belfast is, and we do have an innovation district which we're now scaling, but actually it's a very, very long-term investment, and that was pointed out in the presentations earlier. So our innovation district came out as a legacy from the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. We got 10 million investment to invest in the heartlands of where the Titanic was built, and a brownfield site with no regeneration plans at that stage. And we built our incubator synthesis system in that middle of that brownfield area. Then 10 years later, we then invested in terms of moving university research into that brownfield site again to provide that genesis with a specific investment focus on innovation in cyber. So that was in 2005. 20 years later, those strategic investments 10 and 20 years ago have now resulted in Belfast being the #1 destination for US FDI in cyber. We're recognised as a cluster highlighted in those areas. So I guess one of the critical aspects here, these are very long-term strategic aspects. So we have built those areas with 2,300 employees within that sector specifically, and have something unique that differentiates us, which we can build on. At the stage where we are now, we're now moving towards how we can scale that into broader sectors and how we can magnify that impact. And as Emma pointed out, a lot of that is a leadership perspective. So how can we provide that local leadership in order to provide that next level strategic intent and bring those partners together? And through Belfast City Council, we have established a partnership which is called Innovation City Belfast. So that's with both our leading universities, with our local incubator systems partner, with our ports and harbours in the area, in addition to with our enterprise agencies. So coming together for the common aspect of growing that productivity piece in those innovation areas, but also that inclusive agenda. So that's a critical piece of how you can convene and provide more than that zero-sum game in terms of innovation investment. I guess the second piece in terms of that leadership and long-term piece is you need to have funding assets to do that. So through Innovation City Belfast and through that partnership within those local partners, we have developed the Belfast Region City Deal, which is £1 billion investment, 350 million, specifically innovation centres of excellence and digital innovation, but also key aspects around that infrastructure, because that is also in terms of enabling within that environment a very necessary aspect, as well as that innovation research, and a key thread in order to provide those skills that are required in terms of that leading that demand for the next 10 years and what we believe our potential outcome would be. I guess the key aspect from that, and I guess which is IDG, we're really glad to work with them very closely on, is how we bring the social dimension into it, because actually part of understanding those productivity pieces is understanding how we move those who are perhaps economically inactive into higher productivity jobs and provide more joined up approaches and strategies with that. And I think that's a key role that councils and local partners can provide in terms of accessing that real knowledge on the ground, which can't be done with a top-down approach as well. So we're kind of midpoint looking towards really scaling where we're in a very strong place, but magnifying that in terms of broader cluster perspective.
Jane, thank you so much. There's an awful lot in what you've just said, but you emphasized this point about patience and a long-term approach. You talked about mobilizing capital at scale. You talked quite a bit about the kinds of partnerships that you've been created and how they overlap and also reinforce each other. And you also talked about the outcome, that if you like, there's a very specific outcome in Belfast, which is this world-class cyber cluster that you've been able to create, which has attracted massive American investment and has become, in a certain sense, the leading cyber cluster in Europe. So very, very interesting, and thank you for that. You also, of course, made the same point as Emma and Mayor Joanne, that this has to have a strong social dividend, and I'm sure we'll come back to all of that. Rochelle, please can we bring you now into the conversation? Talking from the Leeds perspective, how do you see this twin set of challenges? On the one hand, the startup challenge, on the other hand, the growth challenge. How does that look to you?
So I suppose similar to the speakers before, we're also re-establishing, what we do and how we do it. I think there's no surprises that the last 12 months notwithstanding, I've raised some really new questions. So just to set a bit of context, about 5 years ago, we put a proposal together, which was about, the Leeds Innovation District and how we wanted to operate. It was very sort of geographically defined at the time and was made up by some key universities in the arts and sciences, the University of Leeds and Beckett, and also the teaching hospital. So a lot's happened since then, clearly, but what that sort of background and sort of grounding has given us is a real understanding of our assets and who we are and what strengths we have to play. So certainly in terms of sort of health, that's a big key area for us, not because of our infrastructure that we have with the NHS and the connectivity we have. Finance certainly being sort of the second capital for finance and understanding our professional services and seeing that as a real opportunity for fintech. Certainly the announcement of the UK Infrastructure Bank was really sort of echoes that recognition of those capabilities. And thirdly, our sort of strengths in digital. But I think the interesting thing here is that you probably asked a number of cities the same thing about their assets, and they may well say the same thing. And I think the challenge here is really to understand our sort of what we refer to as our comparative advantage. And that takes a bit more thinking through, because you can understand your buildings, your organizations, but really to understand the sort of communities and the soft ecosystems that sort of lie behind that takes more time. So I think in the last 12 months, it's given us an opportunity to look at our ecosystem without the buildings, without our institutions, without those organizations, and really understand the strengths and the weaknesses of how that operates as a system. How that operates in terms of responding to startups and scale-ups that go through that journey, and really sort of being honest with ourselves about what works and what doesn't. Our experience working with the MIT REAP program was really useful for lots of different reasons, to understand ourselves, to start sort of thinking about our comparative advantage, but really sort of thinking about where we have that opportunity to do more. And where we need to use that opportunity to not only drive economic impact, which we do, but also really do that without amplifying inequalities and really understanding, as our speakers have spoken about already, the importance of really looking at social and economic impact together. So I'm sure we'll come back to that in a practical sense later. But for me, in terms of our ecosystem, it's not just building, it is about, it doesn't have an edge. And our challenge now is, we've got an Innovation District Commission underway at the moment, which really looks at that again with a fresh light, looking about what we've learned, where we are, implications of the pandemic and Brexit, and thinking through what evidence we need to bring our partners alongside us, thinking very carefully about that public-private interface and how as sort of local government need to sort of really be the glue between that. And think about our position, not only as a city, but as a region. We've got an exciting opportunity now to be part of West Yorkshire, and certainly with the new mayor, it brings lots of opportunities, as we've seen in Liverpool, to really sort of push those boundaries and certainly exercise that leadership. Unlock innovation in the broadest sense, think about our depth and breadth, because it's not just about frontier science and technology and white coats, it's also about our traditional industries, textiles manufacturing, which is a really strong part of our economy, certainly where we are in West Yorkshire. And lastly, thinking about diversity as our asset. So when we talk about diversity, it's not just about founders, it's about the sectors, it's about the stages that these companies are at and the way we interact across different stakeholders, and that being the opportunity really. So much less about vertical sectors and much more about the capabilities we want to bring and build across horizontally.
Rochelle, again, there's so much richness in what you've just said, but one of the things I think you really demonstrated was this kind of multi-cycle, multi-wave approach that Tim spoke about in his remarks. And it's very clear that you're very consciously, as it were, learning, pausing, reviewing, and then moving on and building one cycle on top of the next, which seems to me to be very interesting, very astute sort of observation about it being a learning partnership as you move forward together. And then you've made two other, I think, very interesting points that nobody else has yet made. One is your point about the region, that it's not just the city of Leeds, but it's the whole of West Yorkshire and how you work together with towns and rural areas. That's one of the questions that's in the chat, and we'll come back to that, I think, in a minute. And then the last point you made was about diversity and making sure that there's not just the social dividend that's already been described, but that you're building an ecosystem that benefits from what we might call the competitive advantage of diversity, of having multiple, as it were, contributions and mindsets and everything else. So this is a very rich conversation, and thank you very much. Mayor Joanne, is there anything you want to say in terms of what you've heard so far? And then I'm going to pitch you another question in a minute, but do you have any reflections on the first three contributions?
Yeah, you know, some things that have been said, you know, really resonate with me. I think what Emma said earlier about ensuring, I think it was Emma, we talk about, you know, economic impact and social impact as different things, and actually it's the same thing. And I've been having those conversations that we try to say, you know, there's business over here and then the social impact, when actually our economic growth is also measured by our social impact, so not separating those things out. Music to my ears in terms of what Rochelle says around diversity, you know, it is a key strength. One of the things I've got to, you know, give credit to our chief executive, who's been working with all our stakeholders. You know, I've only been in post a couple of months. I can take no credit for some of the fantastic partnership work that's gone on, but something that our chief executive and I are on the same page about, which is something that Emma mentioned, was about giving up control. The local authority is not always the best at doing things. And, you know, in the past, I think there's been a sense of, you know, wanting to be the key player and having, putting the big stamp on things, and actually standing back and giving up control and letting, again, some of the great innovators, you know, creating the right environment rather than dictating how it should be, is something that myself and the chief executive talk about regularly. And I think having the right attitude is really important when you're doing this partnership and stakeholder work, and recognizing you're not the best, and also, you know, having a sense of what is possible and what can be done, I think is something that I'd just like to add to the mix.
Thank you very much, Mayor Joanne. And to our audience, firstly, thank you for the questions you're sending. We will address all of them, and we've got plenty of time for the discussion. And also to tell you that if you're enjoying this conversation so far, we are planning to host CPC and UK IDG working together an innovation summit on September the 23rd in the morning. I'll tell you more about that shortly. It will be a virtual event, and therefore you can participate from anywhere. But this will be a half-day event when we really dig in to some of the points that Mayor Joanne was just making, really about the key roles of local government and how local government learns, as it were, to convene without necessarily taking the lead every time. And that's going to be the subject of the next bit of our discussion, but we hope to welcome you on September the 23rd for the UK Innovation Summit. More to come on that. Now, let me come back to Rochelle and Jane, if I may, and say, picking up on what Mayor Joanne just said, have you got examples of where the local authority has recognized that it needs to make something happen, but it may not be, as it were, the leader itself? Do you recognize what Mayor Joanne was saying? And can you give us some examples from Belfast and Leeds? Let's start with you, Jane, if we may.
Yes, totally echo those points. And I guess we've got probably two very clear examples where City Council, Belfast City Council has been a convener. And I guess to the point as well, this is for the region, and recognising that a city's impact is also a regional impact. So where you have those clusters, there is a spillover effect. And in Belfast and Northern Ireland, we need to look at the scale of the entire region, not just Northern Ireland, but also East, West and North, South. So the Belfast Region City Deal, which is chaired by the Chief Executive of Belfast City Council, involves 6 councils in the Belfast region, 6 out of 10, and 1 million people within that grouping. There is then our local enterprise agencies are part of that, but also the government departments of communities and economy, and bringing together those stakeholders, and also those university pieces. So very much a joined up approach. And I guess what we have found the last 2 years where that has been developed is that formulation of having that different partnership creates different things as consequences of that, not just delivering the program itself. It creates a different way of working, from getting that co-design and those new opportunities and different relationships. So not only the tangible outcomes of which is our £1 billion program in terms of the city deal, but actually establishing new relationships and delivering. And that's an economic and a regional kind of impactor as well. The other part of that is in terms of the Innovation City Belfast and that second partnership. And we work with Fraunhofer Institute actually to formulate what is best for the region. And Belfast has many kind of analogies with kind of what Fraunhofer have done, but using that broader partnership approach to formalise that. And one of our key programmes is delivery of an innovation district, that next stage ambition. So working to understand how we can co-design with our universities, with our higher education colleges, with our FE colleges, and with our economic providers, just to get the actual combined benefit of that as a proposition. So I guess two very tangible aspects where we have moved from a level of actually having programs and projects to deliver on, which is formed that new system of working, and using that as a kind of a pebble in the pond for economic development for the whole of Northern Ireland.
Jane, this is a very helpful answer, and Richard Collins, one of our esteemed audience, has made the point, and he wants Tim to talk about this in a minute. We'll give Tim a chance to do that, but he's made the point that it's easy for this language to drift into this being that, you know, innovation is what happens in cities, but what happens for the rest. And he makes the point that, you know, large numbers of people don't live in cities. And are you saying then that the innovation system that you've begun to develop in the north of Ireland is actually infusing more innovative jobs and enterprises outside of the major cities, Jane?
Absolutely. Belfast is a major, many people travel from the regions into Belfast to both work in the cities, so are also from the different council areas, but also with the post-COVID lens, and I see that was one of the questions as well. There are different ways of working that are possible now in terms of remote working and capabilities. So we're seeing our city as that agglomeration, that focus, which you need a level of scale to provide that. New universities are involved in some of our centres of excellence for research. But actually, through the city deal, we are delivering regional innovation hubs based upon those areas of excellence in all those council areas. So establishing those incubator systems, those skills environments to provide that dispersion, but still based in the same strategic direction we have for the region. So, you know, managing that dispersion in a joined up approach and magnifying the impact both for the city, but also for the regions. And I guess whilst no one would have wished for the pandemic, the consequence of that is actually we have got other different ways of working together, more collectively at a regional pace, and also which has actually been more effective in terms of driving that dispersion and speed that might have been more challenging had that kind of remote working piece not been available.
Jane, that's a very, very helpful comment. We're going to come to Rochelle now for some reflections on similar points. I guess the interesting debatable that we'll try to address at the summit on September the 23rd is whether towns and rural areas actually need cities to make this work, or whether there's another way of doing innovation in those locations. But Rochelle, the original question was examples of where city government is playing a key role, but not the leading role, and has been wise enough to know that it doesn't need to dominate. And then I'd love to hear your comment about the wider West Yorkshire region as well.
Okay, thanks, Greg. So I'm only kind of 10 months into the local authority, so I'll speak from my experience. And it has been a learning journey, you know, playing that convener role when you're so desperately trying to get things done. So I see a real shift in, you know, so our sort of definition, how we work. It is about real collaboration, not consultation. You know, I sort of smile, I call it extreme collaboration, so that this is about action as much as involvement. And that means action, and, you know, that actually means being more innovative in the way that we work. So I suppose I'd frame it as, you know, convener, curator, moving over to catalyst, challenger, and I don't think that's a bad place to be. You know, I see the sort of local authorities as in an unusual position to be able to sort of see across the ecosystem public and private city and districts, and work with others to really, as Jane said, co-create solutions that work for all. Some good examples of that lately have been our initiatives, which have been about really driving the diversity of our pipeline in our innovative entrepreneurs. So we have developed an pre-accelerator program, so realizing that you need to go right back to the beginning to open and remove doors to participation and really open up those forums. So a pre-accelerator which didn't look at sector, didn't look at a type of company, didn't look at a stage particularly other than being fairly early on, and help those companies, 15 startups, go through that process of, with a diverse group, go through that process of developing an idea into an investable proposition. So I guess other things have been added to that as we've sort of developed that program, including a talent program for young people to inspire them into innovative careers, whether they want to be founders or whether they want to join an innovative firm. But really, I guess what I'm saying is we need a cultural shift. A cultural shift in how we see innovation and who owns it, who belongs to it, who can participate and who benefits. And that requires a different way of working. I've got a background in design, so it kind of fits for me to think about, designing a business model and designing a product or a services in the same way that we design initiatives and supports and programs. It's about ideation, it's about test and learn, it's about, having good evidence and data, but keeping iterating over time. And I think that's the new way of working that we need to sort of shift to.
Rochelle, thank you very much. There's so much sense in what you're saying. I hope people are taking notes, because there's a lot of very nuanced observations there about the role of local government. Mayor Joanne, I'd like to come to you for one more comment before we go back to Emma and Tim on the national agenda, which is simply to ask you whether you recognise, in a sense, what Jane and Rochelle have been saying, firstly about local government learning to be a wise partner rather than a dominant partner, and also, in a sense, these much bigger geographies that involve towns and rural areas and coastal areas. How do you see Liverpool in relation to all of that?
So I have the employment and skills portfolio in the Liverpool City region. I think I've only attended one meeting as yet, but my background's around employment and skills, and I just completed a big piece of research for the region before I ran for mayor around positive action. In terms of access and opportunities, and sort of very much what Rochelle was saying about design and opportunities, we have an issue where there's lots of support available. There's lots of interventions around college, education, university, and still we have growth sectors that do not have, where we have skills gap, and we have untapped resources in terms of people being accessing those opportunities. So that pathway across the region, I think, can become more seamless. So you might train, for example, as a highways apprentice in Liverpool local authority, but move into, St Helens or Halton local authority in order for your career. Saying that you might work in Bolster Creative in Liverpool in a creative tech company and move on to the new supercomputing opportunities there are in Halton. So very much in terms of educating employment opportunities, I see that a focus and a role that I have to play in trying to create that as a much more seamless pathway across the region. People within the region all work in the different boroughs and different areas, and we are a devolved authority, and that we should be thinking as one in order to create those pathways. So yeah, absolutely identify with what Rochelle was saying, and I'm sorry, this COVID thing, I forget the first point you asked me, Greg.
No, I think you've covered it actually, because you covered it brilliantly in your earlier remark. So thank you very much, and we really appreciate you being here while you're feeling so unwell as well. Thank you again. I just want to mention to those who are managing the chat for us, you can see there that the September 23rd Innovation Summit is being advertised. If you'd like to click on the link, that would be great. Also, just talk to the CPC team behind the scenes. Could we have the links up in the chat, please, for the 2 Innovation Hubs reports that Tim referred to, because there are some delegates who'd like to access those and they haven't been able to find them yet on the website. Emma, I want to come to you if I may now. Let's just talk for a minute about the national dimension to this. Obviously, the innovation districts in the UK are beginning to organise together, and you're the chair of the UK Innovation Districts Group. What role do you think that they can play working together that's different from what they do on their own? And how can that support, the growth and development of UK PLC, the enterprise, the trade, the innovation agenda?
Absolutely, yeah. I think in terms of the first part, what role can we play together rather than individually? Some of the things have already been mentioned before, but just to recap, I think that there is a really strong role to learn from and with each other, to avoid repeating some of the same mistakes, and to continually move the agenda further forward and faster. So we've heard a lot today about the need for those places, those innovation places that are perhaps a little bit more established. How do we help each other go deeper, go further? How do we really face into what the social innovation challenges are of today? And how do we really return more inclusive innovation, investment and practice? To Tim's report, we use the phrase whole place return. And I think that's a way of trying to epitomize that we need those deep roots, we need that local context, and we need that whole return delivery of innovation activity. And these are really wicked problems. These are really big, challenging issues that we actually haven't managed to resolve. Well, in fact, not many nations have. It's a global problem in terms of how you unite that innovation-led growth and inclusive growth. As we said before, really understanding the interdependency between the economic and the social dimensions. They are all related. So we need to be able to think about the solutions that better understand them as connected. And these aren't simple problems. These aren't like easy things to address or to fix. So the more that we can learn together from a mix of experiences, places and minds, and the more we can breed in that really important diversity point that Rochelle made earlier, diversity makes us smarter without a shadow of a doubt. So we have to learn from those diverse and smart networks. We have to feed them. So working as a collective, it does add more intelligence into the mix and more shared experience and more lived experience into the mix. I think that we also have a role to motivate one another. There's an element of keep the pace, keep up with the Joneses even, how can we push one another further and faster, like I said. How can we really think about potential spillovers? So not just in the regional and the sub-regional impact that we've talked about already, which is really important, but also in the national kind of connection around the network. If there's an opportunity that lands in Leeds, let's say, but actually there's a growth spillover potential that could then translate to Manchester or to Belfast or somewhere else in London, we need to be thinking more as a hub and spoke model where we can connect these opportunities and grow markets in multiple localities. And there are easy ways to do that, especially with the digital revolution that we've seen unlocked in the last 18 months. So, by having those strong networks, those trust, those relationships, and that stability of a kind of framework to work within, we can fast track some of those spillover effects at a national level as well as at a localized level. I think being joined up and having a coordinated voice to government so that we can really help inform and influence policy from a practitioner's point of view is really important. How can we on the ground, with the mix of those voices that we keep mentioning, so public, private, academic and community participants and active participants, how can we really get that joined up voice to influence government policy? And we've started to do so much more of that, since what was the industrial strategy, being involved in shaping that and actually really making the case, as many did, about the importance of place within that. And we're seeing that translate across to the innovation strategy now, which, as you said, we're waiting for with bated breath, but we hope that there's more of an open door now to understand the role of that practitioner experience and that coordinated learning and that iterative learning that Rochelle mentioned so well earlier on. We have big challenges ahead. If we're to really adopt mission-led innovation and tackle huge, wicked societal issues, everything from how do we make our cities more resilient to the climate change 1.5 degree best case scenario. There's a massive strand of clean tech innovation that we need to be facing into right now that is even just about how do we build more resilient cities because of the concentration of people in them and because of the concentration of the heat island effects. So even just having very practical dimensions of exploration and study where we can prototype and pilot things in a really fast-tracked and innovative way, that's going to see greater return on some of these big picture challenges that require that mission focus that Mariana Mazzucati and many others really talk about well.
Emma, thank you so much. Just before we react to what you said, we're going to say a big thank you to Mayor Joanne Anderson, who's now had to leave us, but we really appreciated having her here. Thank you very much to the Mayor of Liverpool. Great to have her with us. Emma, there's so many interesting things that you've said there, and in a minute, let's come on for everyone to the three big questions that are being asked in the Q&A. So one of them is about the unintended consequences of innovation districts, and particularly the benefits falling, particularly in the real estate sector. So there are 2 or 3 different questions about inflation in real estate, how innovation districts can end up being part of a gentrification process, and what do we do to make sure that, as it were, we can keep a broadly based social benefit rather than just it being captured, as it were, in the real estate system. There's a second big question about innovation districts and the green recovery. How do innovation districts, or how do innovation hubs, innovation ecosystems really help us to achieve our carbon targets? And then there's a third big question in here that's coming out sort of consistently about COVID and whether COVID has been a trigger for more innovation, and what part this kind of innovative approach should play in our post-COVID recovery. So we're going to debate those 3 big issues because lots of people have asked those questions. But before we get to that, Tim, there's a couple of questions that are pointed to you. So firstly, Peter Madden has asked a very good question, which is, how many places can the UK really hope will become mature, scalable innovation hubs? He says, left to their own devices, maybe 50, 60 or 100 cities in the UK would think they can do it. Is that realistic, Tim? Are there any natural limits to what the UK can achieve here from your point of view?
Thank you, Greg. Great question. And I guess we can only so far be guided by what the world's leading innovation regions, of which there are several that would be said to be more advanced, more mature, have been working harder for longer on this agenda, and what they've experienced. And I think we can say, whether we look at the different parts of the coast of the USA and Eastern Canada, or whether we look at Central Europe, or whether we look at Korea, or whether we look at certainly parts of Southeast Asia as well, I think we can say that it's certainly quite plausible that we have, 10 or 15 very established, globally significant locations that really achieve fuller and faster maturity than they have to date. And alongside, in the next cycle, another 20 to 30 locations that may be operating at, in particular niches or particular complementary roles to those hubs that can be accommodated. That would be roughly the trajectory we're seeing in those other locations where you've got the connectivity, you've got the innovation appetite, you've got the market working well, and in a certain sense, recognition of the mutual specializations that exist in that wider regional geography. So I do think is right. Peter's very much right to say we cannot. It's very important to prioritize and to develop a clear sense of what is realistic and plausible, and to be selective in one's intentions and ambitions, and to be informed by what's worked elsewhere. But I think we can do that much better, a greater increment better than we have so far, to the extent that I don't think we need to worry yet about spreading too thinly. I think we need to just focus on getting the initial vanguard and second tier or second phase locations really firing on all cylinders.
And Tim, what's your view about the comments made by both Mayor Joanne, by Rochelle, and also by Jane, that in a sense, if you begin with a city, it provides you with an opportunity to then build a network of innovative locations that do include smaller cities, towns, rural areas that are neighboring. Is that part of the answer, or does that only work in certain kinds of geographies?
Well, it's certainly true to say that in the UK, we inherit geographies that are relatively what you would call monocentric. The city itself has historically been the gravitational sort of center for regional markets. And in other locations around the world, we have seen, whether it's in Bavaria, or whether it's in parts of Switzerland, or whether it's in parts of Korea and Taiwan, that actually a slightly more polycentric, multi-center approach has emerged. But in all cases, there has been a recognition that in most of the leading industries that are fastest growing, there is an urbanizing impulse or a collaboration demand impulse that does require a very deliberate attempt to bring activities together, to bring academia and business, large and small, and civic activities closer together in a higher intensity relationship. That's usually more effective in city geographies or places where you have high levels of connectivity. And therefore, in the places that have tried to do this well, you might say point to the Netherlands, after they've reached a critical mass in those locations, even in smaller cities or large towns, you then get more of the spillover effect into rural areas and beyond. So I think we need to see about the relationships between that. I think as colleagues have been saying, the cities and the rural areas, and avoid any sense that there's a zero sum, and start to track and map and observe where these linkages can be harnessed collectively.
Great, Tim, thank you very much indeed. So panel, we've got 3 big juicy questions. We've got about 12 minutes to deal with them. So it's sort of a minute each on each one, if you know what I mean. Why don't we start with this thing about unintended consequences and externalities, as it were, the effect that innovation locations can have on rising property prices, super profits for the real estate community, and as it were, the externalization of the benefits to a small group of people rather than to a wider group of people. How big is this problem in your view, and what can we do about it? Emma.
Right, I'll be as quick as I possibly can. It's a massive problem. It's a really fundamental problem. And actually, just to highlight that, conversations with those that were involved in Silicon Valley and the setup in the early days, probably one of those most recognized, most known innovation districts, they openly acknowledged that they strangled out the SME market. So that startup kind of cultural, creative, edgy, micro community basically got squeezed out of Silicon Valley. And once you do that, you start to dry up, just like if you don't have your diversity feeding the innovation network, if you don't have the small and the micro players fueling that, you dry out of ideas pretty quick, you know, so you need to cultivate that landscape, that kind of fertile territory to keep innovation districts functioning, let alone really excelling and succeeding. In terms of how we deal with that, big, difficult question, but the first thing I'd say is quite a simple response. We need to track the unintended consequences. You know, we need to get better at acknowledging we've got to monitor and understand the good and the bad and react to them accordingly. So being a little bit more open and honest about where those effects are and then how we respond to them, again, on an iterative, ongoing basis. It's not good enough to wait 10 years, then look back and do a kind of audit or review and say, oh yeah, there were some problems. You know, that just doesn't work in this sort of day and age and the rapid approach that we need to be adopting. And one really practical example I'd offer is we need to turn a lot of our innovation capacity towards the foundational economy in a really positive way. So as an example, tiny scale, but around the Olympic Park, we launched an innovation challenge that was specifically focused around how can we design new approaches, new models to fitting out affordable workspaces and particularly creative workspaces, because often the land or the units are allocated, but there's a barrier to actually fitting out them that can't be breached. And they can stand vacant because although they may be deemed affordable workspace, unless you can fit them out, it's quite hard to use and there's a bit of a cost hurdle to overcome. So that's a really, really practical micro example of how we're trying to use some of our innovation funding, but also our innovation capacity and mindset and models of practice to face into not only the foundational economy, but very everyday practical kind of solutions. And I think we need to see much, much more of that. Not just focusing, as someone said earlier on, the lab coats and the kind of, you know, the high-end, high-tech innovation agenda. It's about how do we make it more everyday, more accessible and pointed towards the things that matter to all different people.
Great.
Would you like me to move on to the next or let someone else speak?
No, I want to go around the room if we may. Rochelle, your thoughts on this? The unintended consequences of innovation districts, what can we do about them? Is it a real problem? And if so, what's needed?
yes, it's a real problem, and we're all aware, and we need to track and understand and make sure we have deliberately plans in place to make sure we don't exasperate those inequalities. So, an example from me would be in the Innovation District Commission that I was describing earlier. We've got a parallel piece of work, which is a spatial commission, and it's exactly to look, beyond the district, to look across the city, to think about how that interplays. We've got another piece of work which is about districts and cities, again to understand those linkages that Tim talked about. I think the interesting point Emma raised was our innovation district has the most concentrated area of cultural assets. And just thinking, it's just a throw in a thought, but that importance of livable cities being innovative and creative.
Great, Rochelle, thank you very much. Jane, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just would reinforce Emma's points and Rochelle's point, particularly in getting that ecosystem right and that balance of FDI and major multinationals and SMEs. I guess for me, to mirror Joanne's points as well, you can't get the economy right unless you get the social piece right. For us, we're within the tech sector at full employment. So there's just a displacement thing happening unless we actually look towards those who are not currently in that technology kind of ecosystem. So we're doing some pilots in that place in terms of looking at diversity specific initial pilots, looking at bringing women who are non-tech into the workforce, and actually how do we provide that reskilling and wraparound interventions to allow them to access and be contributors in that space. And that's, I think, with the post-COVID lens to the third point, that actually some things that you can do now because there is more ability to have remote and home working. Another piece that we're also practically delivering on the ground is a program with connection to places Catapult. Actually, it's a maritime mile, and it's working within Sailortown, one of our areas within the middle of our innovation district, but co-designing solutions with those social enterprise groups, with those community groups. So we're not defining a solution that brings in that inclusion piece. We're working with those partners to actually provide a diversity in that co-design piece as well. So I think the work of the IDG is really important as well in terms of how we actually take the collective learning together. These are all wicked problems, but we're all struggling with them. We have nuances locally, but actually collectively, I think organisations such as Catapult and IDG can provide a real forum for us to come together and look towards kind of learnings from each of the different groups and regions.
Thank you very much, Jane. Tim, you've been working with innovation locations in Israel, Australia, Canada, Germany, Scandinavia. Do they observe this similar problem of negative externalities, unintended consequences? What do they do about it?
Sure. Well, I think it is a global phenomenon, and it's something that in a way accompanies the process. But I think, as colleagues have rightly observed, more locations are anticipating the effects and are working harder earlier to respond to them and to build in various kinds of resilience against those effects. I think the one thing that I would observe that is common to cities and regions where they're a little bit further on in the journey is that the major anchor institutions and major anchor businesses have, in many cases, if I think of Philadelphia or I think of a smaller city like Eindhoven in Holland, you see the major institutions and businesses have become more organized around how they can play a role, both around procurement, around skills and workforce, around provision of kinds of housing and amenity that is shared and is available for not just the innovation community, but also the wider public. And they have created various kinds of initiatives, various kinds of governance arrangements that in effect take the heat off partly some of the local governments from having to make what that would be perceived to be challenging or unpopular decisions, but also are quite innovative and responsive to changing innovation needs. So I think you see in those places an attempt to really build a third or fourth cycle approach that is a little bit more enduring and has the ability to allow all of the anchor organizations to have a footprint and to help and support local government to find the right solutions earlier in the process.
Great, Tim, thank you very much. So our thanks for that question to Andrew and to Ben Hawes. Green questions came from Anonymous and Alex Cousins, and the COVID question comes from Sam Williams. So it's 1 minute each, starting with Rochelle and then Emma and then Jane, on how does all of this relate to the green recovery, decarbonisation and our post-COVID recovery more generally? Only a small question. Rochelle, over to you.
Big challenges need innovation. We've got a net zero target of 2030, which is ambitious. We've got programs in place, but we need more innovation, more participation, startups, scale-ups, and the skills to make it happen. So this is the time to accelerate innovation and really get some fire behind it. On the COVID piece, much related, but another point about resilience that Tim mentioned, I think this is let's be better prepared next time. Let's build in some more agility. Let's build innovation districts and hubs that are able to help us through this type of, crisis and environment and come out the other way stronger, and just build that agility as a core competence in our regions.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. Emma, your thoughts?
I'd link the two questions together by saying, what we've had in the last 18 months in bucket loads is disruption, disruption not felt or seen probably since the Second World War, at that scale. And disruption creates the ideal conditions for innovation, as Rochelle said. And so we need to innovate across three interconnected crises: the climate crisis, the economic crisis, and the health crisis. They are all interrelated, and we've never really properly understood or considered them as such. But now we do. We really see that they are all connected, and that inequality is cut across every single one of those. And that's been exposed and laid bare to such an extent that we haven't seen or understood until now. So we can't put it back in the box. We can't hide away from these things anymore. And I think that creates, as I say, an ideal landscape for innovation and for innovation-led recovery. I think that the point I was making about supercharging mission-focused innovation and really understanding we have to set the agenda, particularly thinking about public sector and the role of local authorities. They're not passive agents in the innovation model and process. They need to be really proactive, and with the communities that they represent as well, we need to be really in there setting the agenda and shaping the outcomes that we want to see from innovation, ensuring that innovation is purposeful and ensure it's tied to responding to those climate challenges, economic challenges and health challenges, because they're the big things that need fixing. And unless we fix them, as Jane said earlier, we're going to see fundamental flaws in the rest of our economic models. They are so fundamental, they will underpin or cap the success that we can see in other sustained economic growth. No matter how good it might look now in other sectors, they will start to crumble if your foundations are made of sand. So, we really need to fix those three interconnected points. And the bit of green light that I can see at the end of the tunnel is that we are seeing with the green economy and clean tech and a whole plethora of other sort of pillars within that. These are new market developments. These are real growth and investment opportunities. And actually what we've seen in the last 2.5 years is a change in the investment market. So we are starting to see big insurance players within the green market. We are starting to see big financial backers. We're starting to see businesses of all scales and sizes and sectors respond to things like ESGs and the SDGs, taking them genuinely seriously in their investment portfolio decision-making, whereas they weren't necessarily doing that not so long ago. So I have a little bit of hope. I think it's about using this disruptive landscape as a firecracker opportunity and seeing that the green recovery is about new markets and about steering and stimulating those new markets for the sort of innovation returns and value we want to generate.
Great. Well, brilliant points from Rochelle and Emma. Jane, the last words are coming to you. Your reflections.
Yes, and I would say what we've seen over the last 18 months has highlighted the massive issue with social and economic outlooks that's caused both through the pandemic and which is likely to be caused as well from the green agenda. I guess it's no longer, it's shone a light on that. So whatever our solutions are, we will need to make sure that the innovation districts are not gentrification pieces. They need to drive and address those really wicked problems, such as we have the health outcomes from those from different social and economic groups. In Northern Ireland, it's a difference of 7 years, depending on what area you're brought up. So those things, I think, have been highlighted, not least by what has happened over the last 18 months. But actually, I guess I'm in a place of great optimism and opportunity, because with disruption, you have a case for innovation, and we have proven the case for innovation. We have proven the case for research over those last 18 months. And the piece is now to maximise the opportunity that that platform has given us. I'm heartened, but what the UK government is putting innovation strategy at the heart of its recovery and the future for that economic piece and where our prospects will be over the next 10 years. So I think it's our opportunity not to miss that. And I guess we need to collectively come together, to come together with those strategies that we actually maximise our innovation, capability and potential, but to solve those really wicked, difficult problems, socially and economically. So I'm very optimistic about the future, but we have a big challenges ahead of us also, Greg.
Jane, thank you very much. And that's a sober note to end on, but I think completely correctly so. So very quickly then, a big thank you to Emma, to Rochelle, to Jane, to Tim, and to Mayor Joanne Anderson. Also, a very heartfelt thank you from me to the CPC events team that have put this event together. The key points, I think, were that whilst innovation may look a little bit like magic, actually, innovation is a kind of intelligence that can be shared, can be acquired, and by sharing it, we grow it and we develop more. We also spoke at some detail about the role of local government as a leading convener, a coordinator, a curator, and a customer. We spoke about the importance of tackling the unintended consequences of innovation concentrations. We spoke about the green recovery. We spoke about the recovery from COVID. And we talked about the fact that all places can participate in an innovation economy, even if not all places are going to be the super cluster nodes that we all know about well. On the slide in front of you, you can see some of the upcoming events from the Connected Places Catapult, and you are warmly invited to join all of them, including next week when I'll be interviewing Sir Richard Leese on Manchester's road to a resilient and green recovery on the 26th of July. And you can see the other events here, culminating on the 23rd of September with the Innovation Places Summit that CPC is hosting with UK, IDG, and Emma. Thank you very much for that opportunity. There'll be many elements to that event on September the 23rd. We'll have knowledge partners there to share. We have invited the government to come and be a key part of that summit. We'll also be looking at how to utilize some of the research that's being done all around the country, and we'll be focusing on what the leadership requirements are. A draft program for that summit will be on our website before the end of this week. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you continue to enjoy the fine weather that we're enjoying now. Once again, a big thank you to our panelists. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks all.
Thank you.